All right. Hey, my name is Darnell Miller, and I am the host of As It Was. And today I have the great privilege of sitting down with Gonzo247, a local artist, a pillar of the community, somebody who's doing great things. And we're going to talk about art and community and kind of that intersection of those two things. So Gonzo, thanks for being here with us.
Man, thank you so much for the invite. It's always great to follow up and catch up and, just be able to talk about art.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so let's just go straight into this, right? So for people who are familiar with you, there's a lot of, you have a lot of murals around Houston, you have a lot of murals around Texas. But what was your first insight or what your first opportunity to begin doing art? Was it something you started as a child or when did that happen for you?
Well, so I guess I would say that my entire art journey was set in motion the day I was born, really. I say that because, or the year I was born, I should say, because I was born in 1972. That same year, I was born in the East End of Houston, Second Ward. But at that same year, a local artist at the time, Leo Tanguma, had started working on what would become his masterpiece mural called The Rebirth of Our Nationality. It took him from 1972 through halfway of 1973 to complete this piece. So growing up, that was in the background of my life because it was on Canal Street and all of my family, extended family, lived up and down Canal Street. So we were always visiting family. So looking back, that's one of my earliest memories of just being in the back seat, looking out the window as we drove past this mural. So as a kid, I didn't really know anything about art. And so seeing the mural kind of started to plant that seed in me of this other, world that I wasn't really a part of or didn't know anything about. I knew that it was something that really interested me and that I one day wanted to do that. So that was kind of my first interaction with art as a mural. And back in those days, there really wasn't a lot of public art here in the city, at least public art that was accessible to me. And, the areas that we would drive around, that was the only thing that I looked forward to seeing. And that's the only thing that really jumped out at me. And so that kind of started my journey as I want to one day do something like that. And I would sketch, just random things, nothing. I didn't really have a direction. And it wasn't until 1980, I was in that time frame. That's kind of when rap and eventually the hip hop culture was kind of trickling across the United States from the East Coast. And when it came through Houston, that was my first taste of something that I could understand as a firstborn generation, Mexican American. My parents are from Mexico. They came here. I was born here. That was the first time I experienced this subculture that I felt I was a part of, because I did kind of have that identity crisis / duality of how do I fit into this picture here in America, being of Mexican descent, but being my own person. And hip hop allowed me to be who I was. And it opened that door to this higher form of expression. And graffiti is the visual language of hip hop. So I got into graffiti at an early age. I was about 13 when I kind of made that connection.
Okay, nice. And that's really interesting, right? That hip hop is kind of what tied it in. And if you look at what you're doing, being Mexican, Mexican American, Mexico has a strong tradition of muralism, right? So that kind of ties in perfectly with where you're at.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, though, I had no clue. I didn't know, growing up, no one ever said, oh, you like art? You should check out Diego Rivera. Or you like art? You should check out Siqueiros. No one ever made that connection for me. So growing up, from birth to, probably after 17, I never knew that there was these Mexican muralists that I could look at as kind of as examples or as inspiration. We did travel a lot to Mexico growing up. But, as a kid growing up, there's so much to see in Mexico and absorb. And the mural, I didn't really see any murals that really spoke to me. Mm-hmm. It was more of the indigenous culture. And so, you would think that that would be a no-brainer to have that connection. But in my situation, my parents didn't know anything about art. I was never exposed to any of that. And I sometimes wonder where I would be had I known about these great Mexican muralists and how that would affect me. But it kind of took a long time to kind of circle back around to that.
Oh, that's super interesting. That's really cool, though. So you said you started drawing graffiti when you were 13. Like, how did you get into that scene?
Well, again, so I heard rap for the first time. It was like 1980, Sugar Hill Gang, Curtis Blow, just the whole golden era of hip hop. And at first, the first part of hip hop that I experienced was rap. And if you know anything about hip hop, rap isn't hip hop and hip hop isn't rap. Rap is one component of hip hop. And there's the four original elements of hip hop is the MC who actually raps. And then you have the B-boy who break dances. And then you have the DJ who creates the music. And then you have the graffiti writer, that creates the visual language of hip hop. And that's kind of the order in which I experienced hip hop. Again, being here in Houston in the 80s, there was no internet. There was no instant, information kind of pouring into me. So I had to I would go to the record store and buy an album or a cassette tape or something. And there'd be the photograph of the MC and the B-boy or the DJ. And in the background, I saw these colors and I was like, yo, what's that? And so that really piqued my interest. And I just started digging for information. A lot of times people now, they're like, oh yeah, whatever. Like that's easy. But you got to put yourself in the context of the 80s when it wasn't easy. Like if you wanted information, you had to go find it. You had to go dig for it. You actually had to put the grunt work of physically getting up and going to a library and digging through the card catalog and digging through the shelves and pulling these books out or magazines and looking. And so that's kind of how I did it. And little by little, just started kind of chipping away at getting a little more information. And eventually I got a sense of what was going on. And that was kind of my I guess, my ticket to graffiti.
That's cool. And when you first started writing, what were you putting up?
So at the time, I was just tagging my real name, my first name, but I kind of had this really stylistic way of tagging it so that if you didn't know my name, you couldn't really read it. But at the same time, I didn't really have an assumed name. I was still kind of developing my alter ego. I was still kind of developing who I was. And it was a little later when I was kind of ready to kind of break out with, who I was artistically. And I did want to have a traditional graffiti writer's name, which is I like to call it your nom de can. And then your last name is a number. And I was looking through the dictionary. Till today, I have no clue what I was looking for as far as the word. I wish I could remember what word I was trying to find. But I ran across the word gonzo. And I read the definition, which is pretty much unorthodox, crazy, doesn't make any sense, zany, just wild, outside the lines. And as soon as I read that, I was like, that really spoke to me as my personality, who I was, and then artistically what I was doing and what I wanted to do. So I just thought that's a perfect name. Up until then, I just thought Gonzo was a Muppet. Later on in life, I heard about Gonzo as, journalistic Hunter S. Thompson reference. And so I was like, okay, I kind of see where all this is going. And I wanted to somehow carve out my own Gonzo identity that would be separate from the Muppet and separate from the writer. And also my last name, 247, originally was Gonzo247 back in the late 80s, early 90s. But I at one point retired 24/7. But later I just was missing the numbers because Gonzo as itself is just a word. It's a noun or adverb, right? Gonzo. Mm-hmm. And without the 247, it got lost in words. When I rebrought the numbers and instead of being 24/7, it was Gonzo247, I reclaimed that identity. Gonzo247 stood out now as something. And now now that I have my numbers back, I kind of had this new wave of like, okay, now this is it. I got to do this. And one of my goals in life was to kind of raise or elevate the name Gonzo247. And this is in my younger days when it was all ego driven. But one of my goals in life, from the ego standpoint of a young person, was when I would say, yo, my name's Gonzo, people would be like, oh, like the Muppet. Or they would say, oh, like the writer. And I wanted to get to a point where the name Gonzo, where I overshadowed that. So when people say, yo, my name's Gonzo, oh, like the graffiti writer, or oh, like the artist. And that's kind of like what really gave me a lot of inspiration early on of like, how much can I put Gonzo out there? So it starts to kind of take over, a Google search, when that finally came out.
And so how has your approach to your art kind of changed and matured since then? I know it's completely different when you're young and like the world is completely ahead of you, but like with more experience and more of life, what does that become?
I think so. There is obviously an artistic component to graffiti writing in general, and that is its own art form. I would never, for me, I could have gone two different paths early on. One would be to continue the traditional graffiti, authentic style of just like going out, bombing things, and going out, tagging, going out, and just getting up, and which, that's its own thing, and I totally respect that. When I was 17, I had, I don't want to call it a vision, but I had an idea of what I wanted to see here in Houston. I had this bigger idea of what I was doing now, how that could play into making Houston the city that I wanted to live in. One of the things that I noticed Houston didn't have was more just public art in the sense of murals everywhere. My idea was like, I want every wall painted with something. Even if it's not my art, I just want art everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so at 17, I kind of started to separate myself from my contemporaries in the sense that like I showed my face. Back then that was like taboo. Like you did not show your face. You did not give out your real name. And so I took a step forward as in I'm going to show my face, because I realized that Houston at the time was not the Houston that it is today. And, people fear the unknown. And so when they saw graffiti, there was no separation between, hey, there's an artistic component to this, and all that's just gang related, and you're a thug, you're a criminal. If you have a spray can in your hand, the cops would just pull over and just harass you. And so it's a long story, but to get to where I'm at today, as I grew as a person, as I matured as an artist, and I mentioned earlier, I got to a point where I separated kind of my ego from what I was doing. Because up until a certain point, everything that I did was for me to see my name on the side of a train, for me to show Houston that I exist. It was so how cool can I be? How much notoriety can I receive? How much of an urban legend can I become? And once I was able to let go of the ego, once I was able to kind of swallow my pride and say, hey, you know what? It's not really about me. It's about the community that I'm going into to paint. And once I changed my direction, and once I was able to think about the community first instead of me, then my art started to really evolve in a different way. And for me to think, I'm going to go into this neighborhood and I'm going to paint the biggest Gonzo piece I can paint. I'm going to think it's cool. My friends are going to think it's cool. Some people might come in like, yo, that's kind of crazy. I like that, whatever. The community might not like it, or they might say, that's cool, but yeah, what about it? And there's no connection to it. There's no mental, emotional connection to the artwork. But once I started to think about the community first and start to think about artwork that I could paint that would have a emotional, mental connection and really resonate with the community that's surrounding that area, that wall, then it really helped, I think, me think and approach differently. But also, it was more like this community felt like this mural was painted for them. And then they responded positively. And then that kind of positive energy kind of kept going forward. And that's kind of where I'm at today.
That's awesome. And I think that step, right, is kind of where your career takes off, because you've become an artist synonymous with that, right? Like you've done a piece for the university here. You've done pieces all across town for different businesses, for different locations, for schools. And I think that mindset of community is the reason people come to you, right?
You know, I want to say that. So like growing up, and this isn't a sad story per se, but no one really ever reached out to me personally and say, hey, you like art? Let me show you something, or let me help you here, or you can come and help me do this thing, or you can volunteer here. Like I never had those kind of opportunities, and I never really saw a way for me to even get to this goal of mine of wanting to be an artist. So kind of now that I'm at where I'm at, I see the importance of including the community. I see the importance of being able to invite people, the community, to come and assist in the creation, or being able to be accessible to the community so that they can have this interaction with the artist and get a deeper meaning, get a deeper sense of what this is all about. And once, in my experience, like once you kind of get a good rapport with anyone that comes up and walks up to you, and they walk away with this deeper appreciation of the artist, and they get to know more about me. I get to know more about them, and we have a real connection. Then they walk away like with this very positive experience. And my goal is that then they can bring their friends back and they can share the knowledge that they gained. But I really do feel that when you give art a chance to be directly accessible to people, then I like to say these art interventions, then it's a you start this positive kind of momentum in people.
Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, I know that you started Aerosol Warfare. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what you do through that?
So Aerosol Warfare has constantly been evolving. We first started Aerosol Warfare back in 1992 to 1993. And originally, Aerosol Warfare was a video magazine. This is before the internet, so you couldn't just YouTube stuff. And I, at this point, had made enough pen pal connections by writing letters, and I connected with people all around the world. Again, this is not an email and this is not a DM. This was literally hand paper written addresses that I found in library books and magazines. But my friends and I here, back in the days, thankfully my dad in the 80s got into that first wave of home consumer video cameras, camcorders. Like they were like this big and you put them on your shoulder. And I was able to convince him to let me borrow the camera. And I would go out with my friends and we would videotape ourselves, kind of just playing around or just, going out and doing things. And then, painting walls illegally. And so what I did is I would make these kind of music videos, like these really 5-10 minutes of us painting, and I would dub music over it, and I would mail them to my different friends around, one to New York, one to LA. And one day a homie in New York was like, yo, that video was super dope. Here's a video of us and my crew painting. And so I received a tape in the mail from New York. I'm like, yo, this is dope. Then I get a tape from El Paso. Then I get a tape from, New Zealand. And, I was getting all these tapes. And then I was like, it'd be cool if I edit like the best parts of all these tapes into one cassette. And I made like this 2-hour long video of just like the good, the bad, the ugly of all graffiti from everywhere. But I also included all elements of hip hop. So I would have dudes that would just like bust rhymes, or, some dudes beatboxing, or a DJ doing some tricks. So it was like this fully hip hop experience based around graffiti. And I sent that to my homie in New York, and he's like, yo, bro, you should sell this. This is dope. And so I was like, okay, that sounds cool. So we named the video cassette Aerosol Warfare and started. I got a P.O. box, and $20 in the mail cash would get you a cassette tape. And back then, like, it seems crazy, but back then to get 2 hours of content from all around, from different places outside of your home. Like that was unheard of. And people just went bananas when they were able to see 2 hours of content. So that's the birth of Aerosol Warfare. And that evolved into crazy underground parties, art warehouse parties. And then that evolved into a, gallery space. And then that evolved into a studio space. And that evolved into kind of like art agency. And so it's had different phases in its time frame. So it's pretty much, heading to a point where Aerosol Warfare can be something that is, for the community, kind of go full circle, where now we can have more things available so we can connect more with the broader community.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. Man, I can't even think about having to pull together that content. Everything is so easy today. Everything is so easy today.
I mean, people can edit super dope videos on their phone now, with effects and with, sound. And back then I had like, 2 VCRs. It was like junkyard DJ style. Like, I had press play here, press pause there. And I had different VCRs connected together. And, I didn't have a switcher. It was just, it was very bootleg, but it's almost like those homemade magazines. Like the fact that it was so crunchy, it just gave it some validity,
Yeah, that was part of the aesthetic.
It definitely wasn't high produced. It wasn't high end.
That's super cool to hear how far that's come, though. That's wild. That's super, super cool. So I want to get into like your art now, into what you're doing. How would you define your style? Because I know when I go around, like I can identify your pieces because of, for me, it's the way you use your 2 green colors, right? You have that light green, that darker green. The way you pair them always looks like you. And that's kind of, for me, that's the identifier. But how do you identify what your art looks like?
For me, I would hate to label it, but I like to think of my art as constantly evolving. Mm-hmm. And I say that because you have some really successful artists throughout time. I'm not just saying today that have built an amazing career off doing the same thing. So that's fine. It's like, that's what they're known for. They don't have to sign it because, looking at it, like that's who they are. And they've been able to carry that across their entire career. And I think that's amazing. For me, I do like the idea of challenging myself. And once I kind of get, I don't want to say comfortable, but once I feel that I've gotten really good at creating this look, then for me, I think, okay, now let me experiment and try something new. It may work, it may not. And that's the whole fun of it, of how else can I evolve, or how else can I push this, or what other direction can I go in? So for me, if you look from 1990 till today, there are some things that you can kind of pick out throughout those decades that really speak to me or identifying me. But at the same time, I think you see an evolution of my art and where it's going till today. And so for me today, I think the use of color, I'm really inspired by indigenous cultures and, high contrasting colors paired up, different combinations of either patterns or color combinations like that, really speak to me. And my current inspiration, I call this series of the hybrid of humanity, is really based on the honor and luxury that I've had to travel abroad through my art, all across Mexico, been to Africa twice, Taiwan, Norway, Amsterdam. So and across the United States, and anytime I go somewhere new, I really try to dig into who was here first. And let me try and find something about this indigenous culture, because no matter where you go, there was someone already there. And the more I got to experience this, I got to really see, every culture and subcultures have their identifying color combos or patterns or symbols that make that culture who they are. But when you step back and look at everything as a whole, you start to see that we are all more alike than we are different. And I kind of absorb all these cultures, and then I kind of mash them up. So kind of going with that hip hop remix mashup, like I take inspirations of these different cultures, and then what I put out is kind of this hybrid For me, it visually represents what it could look like if we all come together, work together, then we make beautiful things happen. So it's kind of symbolic of unity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And I think that works. That's really cool because I think you being from Houston, right? Like I think Houston exemplifies that pretty well in that we have people from all over the place. We're super diverse. So kind of that carryover from that international can find itself at home here and nobody second guesses it. That's really cool.
You know, like, I think I was lucky that I was born and raised here because I've been to other cities that are not as diverse, and I can see the difference. I walk around and I notice the lack of diversity. And I think when you have the luxury of being raised in a city that has people from literally around the world all intermingling, I think it's beneficial because you really get to know people on a deeper level than just seeing them on TV and wondering who they could be as a person. Yeah,
I see that. So earlier you talked about when one of the shift when you were 17 of your art, right? Like of imagining what you wanted Houston to be. At this point, what do you think of where Houston is, right? I know, like you look around, we have graffiti festivals, mural festivals, we have art. It's definitely it's more conducive to public art than it was even 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, I imagine. But what do you think of where we're at now?
I think now, definitely Houston, I can say, has a healthy graffiti and street art scene. Houston has a healthy mural scene. And I think that there is now enough momentum behind these movements to really keep them moving forward indefinitely. Early on in my life, I felt the need to keep pushing this ball of graffiti, street art, urban art, murals, because I felt like if I stop pushing this ball, it's just going to stop rolling because it doesn't have momentum. And part of it was continuing to educate the general public of what this is, who does it, how it's done, and really exposing that part of it. And also nowadays you have more people involved, and a lot of artists now, are proactive in promoting and proactive in pushing this and going out and getting, work on their own. And Houston also, is not the same Houston that it was, 30 years ago. Houston has become a younger city. People have come in from other parts of the country to settle here. And so this dynamic of people from other cities who grew up with graffiti now live here, and they think it's common. It's like, oh yeah, younger people that grew up, they kind of grew up with seeing more murals in the city. So now that they're getting into these gatekeeper roles and they're getting into these decision-making roles, they see this as how I saw it in 1990, and they're not afraid of it. And it's more welcoming. What used to be, feared and unknown is now embraced. And thankfully now it's in demand. So I feel like I don't have to push this thing as much anymore. It has its own momentum. Now I'm like, okay, where else can I channel this energy and push that ball, that new thing? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, where I'm really happy that it's happening now. I really do feel it's going to continue on its own, whether or not I participate. But I now can really focus on just keep rocking, just try something else.
Nice. Yeah, that's super, super cool. So who are some contemporary artists, people you might know, people you work with whose work you look at and you're just like, yeah, like they're pushing it. They're doing good things. They're doing good work.
Originally, when I got into what I was doing, my only references were the old school New York City pioneers, the subway artists, because that's all that existed. There wasn't anything here in Houston. There wasn't anyone else that I knew of. There wasn't anyone else that I could go talk to. So I didn't even look at Houston because there was nothing here yet. I'm not saying I was the first one to do it, but other people, Houston's so big someone else might be doing it too, but they're way on the other side of town. And I mean, we didn't cross paths till later in life. So my first, and I would say almost any graffiti writer from Houston, maybe even Texas, can say that their first impressions or their first inspirations were the subway artists from New York. Right off the bat, there was an artist, or there is an artist, Futura. He used to be Futura 2000. Till today is one of my greatest inspirations. Futura was the first artist to break away from traditional graffiti letters and started to use spray paint to create spray can art. And he opened that door to this entire new direction that spray paint went into. If it wasn't for him, we would also just be focused on just letters. And so I look to him a lot because he was able to open that door so that today I can do these abstract paintings, murals that still have the look, the feel, the aesthetics of my roots in graffiti, but isn't necessarily letter based. So Futura has been and has continued to be one of my inspirations. Another subway graffiti writer, Seen, Seen, monumental in the amount of trains that he painted, the different styles he was able to create, and just the amount of work that he put into the subway lines. Coke 2, also one of the original bombers. And, even kind of moving up the ladder, Dondi. Dondi was another, they consider him the king of styles. So, I mean, those right there, you have to look those guys up. And then kind of moving forward, Shepard Fairey, Obey Giant, he definitely is a machine. Like, I've never really seen a machine. This guy is like constant. And, it's like if you think you've done a lot in life, hang out with this dude one day and you're going to come out thinking, I have not done enough in my life, because he does more in one day than you'll do in a year. So those guys definitely helped me to see what could be possible here in Houston. Like to be able to see what these guys are doing in other cities and knowing that can exist, and then looking at Houston and saying, wow, we're so behind. How can I jumpstart that here? Or how can I emulate, or how can I, import this idea or this content so that Houston can kind of keep up and also kind of catch up. And I think nowadays, with the talent that's here in the city, Houston does compete on a national level. Houston competes on an international level, and the world is just now starting to see that.
Nice, yeah. And I guess one of the last questions I have for you is, when you're working on putting together new pieces, how do you go about that? I know you say you think about the community where it's going to be housed, but like what are some of those steps that you take? What do you think about, and how do you kind of go about planning?
So in the recent, like I really felt, I guess, the power of these tributes to the city. I felt like I got to this point where Houston has given me so much that I felt like I want to kind of pay homage and pay tribute and really give back to the city as a whole. And so I started doing these series of, Houston kind of themed pieces. And really, it's a fun way to really think about how I see Houston and how I interpret Houston, and then be able to put that out to the public. And for me, it's also a fun way to give art back to the community, so that it doesn't matter where you're from in the city, you see the art and you connect with it, and you can pull something out that you connect with directly and resonate with. So I love doing that. So the Houston theme murals is definitely just inspired by my 48 years living here. Apart from that, when I'm working on personal work or working on canvas work or stuff here in my studio, again, right now I'm really thinking about this hybrid of humanity of how can I incorporate my inspirations from different cultures and create this piece that will really talk to anyone from any walk of life. They can see it and be able to, maybe on a very deep level, have that connection of like, I like this painting, and maybe in their subconscious, it takes them back to their home country, or takes them back, to their roots, and it takes them back and makes that kind of parallel of viewing that through this contemporary kind of graffiti style look and feel. And then there's the on the fly inspiration. Sometimes I'm here at the studio and just an idea pops in my head and I'm like, okay, I got to at least start it, at least kind of start doing something, activating it so that idea leaves my head and now I have something tangible. Whether or not I finish it doesn't matter. I just have to work on it, because sometimes I start something, I set it to the side and I won't come back to it for months, maybe a year. And then I come back and I'm like, okay, now that I've thought about it, I'm going to finish it this way. Or I started with this one idea, but after the experience of painting so many other things, I come back with fresh eyes. I'm like, oh, great. Like I can now incorporate this thing into that and make this new idea and concept. So, it's whatever I'm feeling, where I'm at, but definitely the fact that I have the ability and the luxury to be able to create. I think that's really the bigger picture of I know a lot of people that are creative and for whatever reason chose another path in life. And I think deep down inside, everyone wants to create. Everyone has a need to create. And I'm lucky that I'm in a position where that's what I can do every day. I feel like everyone needs to create something every day. And create doesn't necessarily mean art. Could be singing, could be dancing, could be poetry, could be anything. It's the idea that you have this idea in your head and then you manifest the idea, through a process that you create. So that I think everyone should make that an exercise.
Yeah, I agree with that. I tend to also being on the creative side where I get to make stuff and interview people and talk to people who do this like on a daily basis. Like 11-year-old me couldn't have even thought about doing this for a living, right? But like the fact that I can do this was like, yeah, this is amazing. It's like being able to pursue fun, creative things for a living there's nothing like it. It's a blessing. It's absolutely a blessing. I have two things I want to ask you before we wrap up. One is, so you was about almost 2 years ago now. You did a mural on campus for us of St. Thomas Aquinas, and kind of like surrounded by representations of all like the disciplines on campus. So we kind of hit the sciences, all that. But can you tell us a little bit about what went into the making of that mural, what the process was, and the thought behind it?
Yeah, so I was approached with this idea, and for me, when people reach out to me and they say, I have this crazy idea, 9 out of 10, I'm going to jump on it just because I like crazy ideas. And I like when people have this vision and for them it's outside the box. I like the fact that people are willing to step out of their comfort zone to kind of pursue an idea. And I like kind of being either the conduit or being the vessel to helping manifest that. So when the university reached out saying, we have this crazy idea, what do you think? I'm like, that's amazing. And so the idea was, we have all these walls. We have this new mantra to be your bold self. We want to paint a mural on the wall. And for me, I did see how much of a leap and how much of a big step this was for the university. So I understood also the gravity of this. So taking a tour of the campus, although I'd been on the campus many times, I had never been given an official tour. And so as I toured the entire campus, I found these new elements of inspiration. But the goal was to be able to visually tell a story that speaks on the university, speaks on the campus, speaks on the saint, speaks on the neighborhood, the city, and to be able to put all that together in a way that really just, you see it for what it is at first, but then the artwork almost makes your eyes go and explore every part of the mural, and you can slowly start to pick different things out. And I really like the idea that, I want someone to be able to come and look at it and then come back and maybe see something new or see something different or have a different experience every time they come look at it. So I believe that in the end, it was a perfect combination and example of leadership. I think the school leadership had the courage to say, okay, this is unorthodox. We're not really known for this type of thing, but we're going to take a chance on this. And they're doing it for the love of their community. They're doing it for the love of their students. They're doing it for the love of the city, so that students and people that access the campus, they can see something that resonates with them on an artistic level, on a visual level, but also even like the younger students that are coming in that are into graffiti, that are into street art, that are into this urban culture, to be able to see that on a wall. Now they're like, whoa, this school is way cooler than I thought. This school really does have their fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the neighborhood, in the area. And I think it really does help show the different side of the university that you might not have known existed there. So I definitely applaud everyone that was involved. I mean, I get a lot of the credit for it, but it definitely was a team effort. And there was a lot of people that helped just with the whole process. And so I think all of us should be really happy that it was received positively. And the goal maybe would be to where's the next wall going to go? Where's the next mural going to be? And the campus has the potential to become a destination as an open outdoor gallery space where you can just come in and explore all the buildings and have a more than one type of experience.
Yeah, I think so. And I think like art is in our DNA, right? Like we're right by the Menil. Like we used to have like a really tight partnership with them. Like that drive for art on campus, like I think has been there and just hadn't been addressed in a long time. And I think you're right. Like using the space to build that out is a fantastic opportunity.
I think the beauty of it also is the campus already blends in with the community. And sometimes you're walking and you don't even realize that you've stumbled upon a university campus. And I really like how using art to further blur that line is a very smart way to really commit yourself to the neighborhood and really show that you have open arms and you're inviting everyone to come through and again, just have a really pleasant experience while on the campus.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question for you is, what do you have coming up next? What are you working on? What are some of the big projects on deck?
Well, so for me, there's always something cooking, in the laboratory. There's always something cooking. And for me, again, I think part of my growth as a person is I used to love to tell you, yo, I'm rocking this, I'm doing that, and give you this whole list of all these crazy things that I'm working on or pursuing. But now in my I guess my current kind of mentality, I would rather show you what I just did than tell you about all these things I want to do. I'd rather be like, yo, check this out. I just finished this really cool piece. You might like it, or come look at it. I'd rather show you what I've just done than try to talk myself up by trying to tell you all these amazing things that I'm doing. No. It's more about like, yo, check out this last piece. It's super dope. And then, maybe the next thing I do, you'll like, maybe you won't. But the goal is that I'm always doing something, and I'm always happy to share once it's released.
Awesome. And so where do people go to check you out?
My website, GONZO247, and that's the number. So GONZO, number 2, number 4, number 7, .com. And then at GONZO247 on Instagram and Facebook. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, Gonzo. It was absolutely a pleasure. So much.
I really do appreciate the opportunity to connect with your audience. Hopefully, everyone that's watching this will just, we can all come together after this craziness and hang out in real life and maybe on campus, and we can just talk about the mural and everything St. Thomas got going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I look forward to that day.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.